Scholars Academy is an initiative out of Western's Office of Research Services. The Office of Research Services recognizes our responsibility in decolonizing our own processes, systems, and policies. In our steps towards decolonization, we commit to looking at ways to meaningfully engage in reconciliation, build respectful and mutually beneficial relationships, and develop and maintain authentic reciprocal research collaborations that acknowledge Indigenous data sovereignty and reflect upon and decolonize colonial practices that continue to limit Indigenous perspectives and innovations. So, just some quick remarks. Before we delve into the rich content that Dr. Daley has provided for us, I would like to express our sincere gratitude for his participation in the Scholars Academy and for sharing his expertise with us today. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone in attendance today, in person and online. So this seminar is one of several presentations from the mentor cohort of the Western Research Scholars Academy. Scholars Academy is a new mentorship network for Western researchers, and it's co-designed with researchers to provide support through connection and mentorship with fellow esteemed scholars, international academic leaders, professional development, and research resources. Following Dr. Daley's presentation, we encourage you to connect with one another during the following lunch break. This is a chance to foster relationships, exchange ideas, and cultivate the collaborative spirit that defines the Western Research Scholars Academy. Once again, thank you for all your support. Without further delay, I would like to formally introduce Dr. Daley. So Mark is the Chief AI Officer at Western University and a full professor in the Department of Computer Science with cross appointments in 5 other departments, the Brain and Mind Institute, the Rotman Institute of Philosophy, and the Western Institute for Neuroscience. He is also a faculty affiliate of Toronto's Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Mark has previously served as the Vice President Research at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research and the Chief Digital Information Officer, Special Advisor to the President and Associate Vice President here at Western. And Mark is the past chair of Compute Ontario and serves on a number of other boards. So a very busy man. And without further ado, I'll let Mark take it away.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, and thank you all for showing up. I see a lot of people, especially in the front row here, who are making me very nervous because they're domain experts. If you see them throwing things at me, it's because I've said something dumb. Lauren Cipriano, I promise this is not the same talk you just saw at Ivy. So Lauren grabbed me after Ivy and said, "You're not just going to give the same talk again, are you? The first few slides are going to be familiar, but don't worry, we're going to go in a different direction." So I picked a Hemingway quote here. It's from Sun Also Rises. A character was asking another character, "How'd you go bankrupt?" And he said, 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And that's what happens in the face of exponential change. And that's where we're at with AI, or at least I'm going to make a case for why I think that's so. And I can't advance my slides. So this, sorry, I pressed something wrong. Nope, this slide, we don't have the right thing. There we go. Okay, so what is AI? AI and machine learning have been with us for decades. If you've got a credit score, you've been exposed to machine learning. If you've ever used the internet, Google has served you ads based on machine learning. So AI isn't really new. What's new about this moment is advances in generative AI. And so what's generative AI? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm using this definition here because this is the definition that was reached by a committee I was on, working for the federal government, after about 4 hours of fighting with a bunch of really, really smart people from different disciplines. So based purely on the number of human hours that were put into this definition, I like it. So what is generative AI? It is a system that offers a straightforward interface, often conversational. You don't have to read a user's manual. You don't have to go to a weekend-long training course. You can just step up and start using it right away. It intrinsically enables iterative design. So you can ask ChatGPT to do something, and you don't just have to take the output. You can say, "No, I didn't like paragraph 2. Let's go back and rework some of that." It makes available huge amounts of information at the cost of huge amounts of computation in training and semi-huge amounts of computation in inference, depending how efficient you are. And probably the most salient one is it produces outputs that would fool a non-expert into maybe thinking they were human generated, and in some cases, even experts. So everyone is expecting the, here's AI and here's how to use ChatGPT talk, because I give that talk a lot. And this is not that talk. You are research scholars, so I'm going to give you something different. I'm going to provide a little bit of context, and then I'm going to offer some opinions for different potential futures. The one thing I'm certain of is that this technology is disruptive. How disruptive it's going to be and in what ways, I don't know, because I feel an awful lot of humility in the face of an exponential change curve. But what I do know is that really smart people have thought about how to plan and reason under uncertainty. And sort of the consensus way to do that is to build a portfolio of futures and to have a plan. If this future comes to pass, I'm going to do this. If that future comes to pass, I'm going to do that. And this goes back to Royal Dutch Shell and scenario planning in the 1970s. This is really well known in the business community, but it makes sense on a personal level too, and it makes sense as a researcher. So there's a lot of material out there on how to use Copilot to answer your email, and I don't want to get into that. And there is a very possible future where the development of generative AI hits a wall. There's a threshold that it takes us a long time to get over. Maybe we don't even get over. And sort of what we've got now is the best we're ever going to get. And it's already pretty good. But there's a lot of people talking about that scenario because that's what we tend to do as humans. I want to talk about a scenario that I think has non-zero probability where it continues to increase in capacity. And what does that mean for us as researchers? So taking a step back, looking at the broad picture of what's going on right now, here is a paper from DeepMind, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. Tactic AI made it to Nature Communications. It is an AI system for offering strategies to football teams on corner kicks. And 90% of the time, professional football coaches and players prefer the strategies generated by Tactic AI over the human-generated ones. So AI is learning to play sport. That's kind of cool. Another DeepMind result. This is going back a couple of months now, using sort of a variant of the AlphaZero, AlphaGo architecture. Some MIT researchers in DeepMind discovered a whole new class of antibiotics. This isn't an existing antibiotic, and we just tweaked the R group a little bit. This is a whole new class of antibiotics. And so that has real tangible good. There will be infections that were resistant to everything else we've got, like methicillin-resistant apple. And all of a sudden, we now have a tool for attacking those infections. This is a really fun result. Anthropic, which is a company that split off from OpenAI to focus a little more strongly on AI safety, just released their frontier model 3-4 weeks ago now, Claude 3. It is really good. And 2 days after Claude 3 was released, this tweet came up. This is a quantum computing researcher, and he said, based on 2 prompts, Claude reproduced a paper that I've been working on for like a few months. And the paper's not on the internet. I haven't posted it on the archive. 2 prompts, it was able to reproduce that work. Now, this paper isn't groundbreaking. Didn't discover a whole new form of quantum computing, but it's a novel algorithm. It's a contribution. And he said, like, this would make a nice master's thesis, maybe a chapter or 2 in a PhD thesis. And it took me a few months, and Claude did it in about 25 seconds. Now, it needed some guidance from me, but he felt like this was a qualitatively different way of interacting with an LLM. He had not had this experience of an LLM generating what he felt was new knowledge. This is my favorite one to show in the business school. When you show Ivy students this one, they get their hackles up, like, no, I'm smarter than the machine. And I said, okay, well, like, do you want to feel smart or do you want the money? Because if you want the money, professional VCs who are experienced in this paper are 3 times more likely to fund you if you have GPT-4 help you write your pitch. GPT-4 doesn't write the whole pitch for you, but those were people who worked with GPT-4. And by the way, pitching to VCs is also kind of like pitching to grant committees. So we can start to see some connections there. This is Ri Kudan. She recently won Japan's highest award for an upcoming young author. She wrote a book about a prison in the near future in downtown Tokyo that is controlled by AI. And when she accepted her prize, she said, by the way, I co-wrote my book with ChatGPT. And there was a big media furor. And the committee who awarded the prize came forward and said, yeah, we know. She disclosed that, and we don't care. This is great literature. The end. If you have Gen Z employees and soon Gen Alpha employees, they are seeking counsel from ChatGPT and not from you. And on some level, this is sort of like unavoidable, right? Because as a manager, you probably have several direct reports and you've got other stuff you need to do in your day. You probably don't have 4 hours to spend sitting with every single one of your reports. So, today, what do you want to do with your career? Whereas ChatGPT is always there and it's super enthusiastic. Like, hey, let's talk about your career. And whether that career advice is awesome or not is a different conversation. But people are self-reporting that, like, I'd rather talk to the chatbot about career than my boss. This is another Claude 3 result. I really like this one. One of the tests you do with a large context, large language model is a needle in a haystack test. So early LLMs were not so good at finding facts that were later in their context. So that's just the big block of input you give to the LLM and then you run it. And so you want to test, can you find a little piece of information buried in this haystack of input? And the first attempts at really making the context huge in LLMs, they were really bad once you went out as sort of like the first 4 to 8K tokens. Now, state-of-the-art LLMs are all really good at this. So you can see Claude 3 passes the needle in a haystack test, no problem. But louder? Okay, sorry. It's the plant wall, my apologies. So they did the needle in a haystack test with Claude, and it passed. And the test was, here's a whole bunch of software engineering documentation, and then there's a sentence about pizza buried in it. What Claude 3, this is the Opus version of Claude 3, did that other LLMs hadn't, was it came back and said, yeah, but there's no reason for there to be a sentence about pizza in software documentation. So I think you're testing me. And that feels like metacognition, right? Like if a human did that, if we were doing this experiment with a 9-year-old child and they did that, you say, ooh, that's metacognitive ability. That's kind of cool. That's precocious, check mark. Because a machine did it, people are arguing like, is that metacognition or not? And I don't want to fight the semantics, but it's displaying something that looks a lot like metacognition, and that's new. That feels emergent. OpenAI did a really brilliant marketing thing recently. Google announced Gemini 1.5, which has 1 million tokens of context and will scale to 10 million, which is actually huge when the history of large language models gets written, like I guess 6 months from now, because on that time scale, that feels like several centuries. That will be a watershed moment because that changes a lot. OpenAI, right on top of them, announced, but we have a pretty picture generator, and it's a movie generator, and we're not actually going to give you access to it, but if you tweet Sam Altman, maybe we'll generate your video for you. So what Sora does, and of course, all the press attention goes to this because humans like pretty pictures. Million tokens of context seems pretty abstract to me. This looks like, oh, does that mean I can just tell Netflix what I want to watch? I want to see Gary Oldman in a spy thriller, and I'll say, I'll just go watch Slow Horses, but maybe it can generate a new one for you too. So you give Sora a text description of a video you want, and it produces a really compelling, interesting video. And there's lots of consequences there for Hollywood, et cetera, but I don't want to talk about those. Jim Fan at NVIDIA, you should follow him on Twitter if you're on Twitter. He's brilliant. Immediately realized what was going on. This isn't just a video generator. This is a whole world simulator. So go back and look at that. There's reflections. accurate reflections being generated there by the neural net. So it has to know about the physics of light. There are puddles. When she steps in the puddles, they ripple. So it has to know the Navier-Stokes equations, or a good approximation thereof. When you rotate the camera, the world stays consistent. So it's got a physical model of the 3D world. When she walks, it looks like a human walking. So it's got a model of the kinematics of human locomotion. And when two humans interact in a Sora-generated video, they interact in a way that looks authentic. So it also has a model of human behavior. It's not perfect, it makes mistakes, but it's finite. No one has told us what the size of Sora is, because that's trade secret, but let's say it's 60 or 80 billion parameters. Like, if I had told you 2 years ago, or someone had told me 2 years ago, you can kind of model all of reality with about 100 billion floating point numbers, I'd say, no, you're crazy. Like, reality is way too complex, my observed reality. And yet, I have an existence proof now that maybe modeling reality isn't as complex as I thought. And I have a whole world simulator. And that's the point Jim is making here. So that's like a moment of pause and deep breath in. I've been using this slide for about 5 years, almost ever since Ilya made the quote. The gentleman in the bottom right-hand corner there is Ilya Sutskever. He's one of Jeff Hinton's students from back in the day. Wasn't very well known up until last November, when all the OpenAI board drama went down, and now he is better known. I love this quote of his. Imagine your smartest friend and make them 1,000 times smarter and run them 1,000 times faster than real time. How much could you accomplish if you could do 3 years worth of thinking in a single day? And people used to roll their eyes when I put that slide out. They're like, yeah, well, whatever, you guys are just selling the Kool-Aid. And the reality is we're approaching this world. And what does that mean for us as researchers? So here's my stock slide. X-axis is time, and the Y-axis is pick your favorite technology. Number of printing presses in Europe, number of mobile phones owned by humans on planet Earth. Adoption of productive technologies historically tends to be exponential, as does the improvement of those technologies. It eventually becomes sigmoidal because you reach a point of diminishing returns, but there's that exponential bit. And the problem with being where I think we are, which is kind of in the curve there, is we're humans, and we tend to extrapolate in a very simple Bayesian way. What's my best prior for what tomorrow is going to look like? It's today, right? Tomorrow is probably going to be a lot like today, and most of the ways that matter. And so I tend to extrapolate linearly. And at that first part of an exponential curve, it'd be really easy to make a linear extrapolation where you go off to the left and you're like, okay, this AI thing is kind of a big deal, but it's not actually change everything. But if you look prospectively, it looks like a brick wall. And anyone, including me, who tells you, I know what's on the other side of the brick wall, is someone of whom you should be skeptical. And if you don't believe me, adoption is happening exponentially. Here's a few tech products. You can see it took Netflix over 1,000 days to get their first 1 million users. And then ChatGPT, they kind of turned it on, and 15 seconds later, it had 1 million users. This is a really nice chart from an issue of Time that came out a couple months ago that contextualizes things for us. So back in the year 2000, when I was in grad school, AI and machine learning wasn't good for much. There's some really cool theorems, and we really like support vector machines, and we could do some neat classification. The only thing neural nets were actually really any good at was handwriting recognition for US zip codes, and that's work that Jan LeCun did way back in the 80s. But basically, they couldn't do that much. You look at this chart, and what you notice is that things start moving up and to the right, and that y-intercept there gets closer and closer and closer and closer to these events. So we go from, like, we can kind of do handwriting recognition and speech recognition, but it's pretty brutal. Like, everyone remembers the early versions of Siri and how rough they are, to within a period of 2 years, we went from general purpose text completion is impossible, it's not something a machine can do, to actually it's better than most humans. So looking at that chart, looking at all of these tasks that we used to think this is uniquely human, we do this really well, a lot of us are imagining this magenta line here where, but primary research is never going to be touched. Only a human being can do this. And that is a possible world. There is one of those portfolio futures where it actually turns out, AI is just never any good at research, and so it's never going to affect us. And if you believe in that world, you don't want to listen to the rest of my talk because you're just going to think I'm a crazy person. So how does all of this affect research? I've given you sort of the big context. How does it affect us as researchers? Original research is dead. So these are some Google Scholar results that include the text, "I don't have access to real-time data." That's what ChatGPT says when you ask it about real-time data, and those are in published papers. Oh no. Remember, manuscripts are closely scrutinized by 2 peer reviewers, and an editor looks at it, and copy editors, and radiology case reports with our impact factor of 1.9. We are amazing, and we are such a good journal, and here we are. Somehow this got published. I'm very sorry I don't have access to real-time information. And it gets worse. So this individual on Twitter just did the search on Google Scholar, and you can do this yourself. So I'm not going to show you the results. Just do it yourself. Experience the visceral dread when you do it. And she concludes this is truly the worst timeline. But like, why are we in the worst timeline? Well, because we invented a tool that lets us cheat. And human behavior, like, I'm probably getting like, wait, there's psychologists in the room. I'm sorry, I'm simplifying human behavior, but it all looks like game theory to me. If you create toxic incentives, you will get toxic behavior. And for all we talk about DORA and know it's important to recognize community-based research, there are still so many grant panels and P&T committees where it comes down to, well, she's really not that productive, is she? And so there's this huge pressure to publish as much as you can, publish high if you can, but publish a lot, be productive. People will be happy if you're productive. You will be rewarded. You'll get the little pin. You'll get tenure. You'll get that assistant professorship. And so you create incentives for people to publish a lot, and then you give people a tool that lets them publish even faster without doing all the hard work they used to have to do. Some portion of people are going to say, sign me up. And so they do. And the media noticed. So that's not just scientists tweeting each other. The problem is once science Twitter starts going, there are smart science journalists who follow science Twitter. And next thing you know, this is now a story in the general media. Scientists are cheating. They're using ChatGPT to do their homework. And some of those people are professors who are saying students shouldn't be using ChatGPT to write their essays, and now they're writing their papers, and really indignant reporting, and they're right. Society trusts us to be guardians of truth and to behave in ethical ways, and we're not. This one I hate even more. The flaws in the peer review process, I had sort of like, come to terms with, and I know every journal is not a bastion of intellectual honesty. This is iClear, one of the top conferences in deep learning and AI. Focuses on learning representations. And the program committee experienced something that I have also personally anecdotally experienced being on a couple of prize committees this year. And what I experienced was that the letters of reference that used to come in would be shorter, and they'd have spelling and grammar errors because they were written by super senior PIs with limited time. but they would offer me some kind of like personal insight on that individual. And this year, I'd say like 30-ish% of the letters that I read had perfect grammar and spelling. Not a single piece of punctuation out of place. Had a very formal corporate tone. So I'm thinking like, you're so lazy, you didn't even prompt ChatGPT to take on a different personality. You like left the vanilla, Northern California corporate variety. And it didn't say anything personal. It just restated the case that I'd already read. So the material that the candidate provided. And I thought, oh no, I don't like where this is going. So then a couple of the people involved in iClear said, well, let's go and do the analysis. And they looked at a whole bunch of different aspects of the way language is used in reviews for this conference. And if you're not a computer scientist, you need to understand that computer scientists don't care about journal publications. It's all about publishing in the top conferences. So if you get 3 or 4 iClear papers as a young graduate student, you might get a job at OpenAI or Google. And if you don't, then you're a nobody. So this is high stakes. So they did this analysis, and of course, it's impossible to tell if any single piece of text is AI generated. That's not a computable, decidable problem. But when you look at a corpus, you can say, the statistics have shifted, and what they found was their most conservative estimate is 13 to 16% of the reviews going into iClear were entirely machine generated, which is really scary. I want to be judged by a jury of my peers, not a machine. This, so is just looking to see if anyone's in the audience who I can call out here. I got an email this past summer, so last summer actually, from one of our ADRs saying CIHR has just announced this boneheaded policy of AI is not allowed to touch any element of your proposal. And I thought, oh, that sounds weird. So I emailed Alejandro at NSERC and Ted at SHRC, because I know them and I didn't know who was running CIHR at the time after Mike had left, and said, hey, are you guys going to be adopting this policy? Because isn't Canada like one of the founders of AI? Wasn't Jeff Hinton and Joshua Bengio supported by NSERC? And Alejandro back like 5 minutes later, like, what the heck is this? I'm furious. And so for the doing the foolish thing of opening my mouth, I ended up chairing a panel for the tri-agency and the CFI on how should generative AI be used in grant making and grant evaluation. And after a lot of difficult conversation, we came to the conclusion that the best advice we could give, and hopefully this gets adopted as policy, is that if people use generative AI, we would like them to disclose that they did. So if people use it in the production of the grant, we're not going to forbid it, but we would ask that you disclose that you used it. And some panelists wanted people to like tell us exactly which lines in the narrative were AI, and we backed away from that. And then on the evaluation side, the committee concluded that none of the agencies had the infrastructure to do this ethically. So you should definitely not be uploading someone's intellectual property to a cloud provider that you lose stewardship and control of the data. So that was a showstopper. But the second order question, we were a bad committee and we just didn't comment on because there was too much fighting in this committee is there a point in the future where we should allow or invite an AI to be a panelist on the review panel? And I have a visceral reaction of, again, I want to be judged by a jury of my peers, not by a machine. But there is also evidence in the literature now that if you prompt these things correctly and control, they can be less biased than any other human reviewer. And they can be particularly good at interrogating the details of things like EDI statements. And so should we forego that just because I feel it's kind of gross to be evaluated by a machine rather than a human, or should we actually be doing what's best for research and society? This was an early GPT-4 GWiz end-to-end synthetic chemistry paper, including all of the bench work being done by a robot, just from a few prompts to GPT. And there's lots of examples of this in the literature now. And they disclosed what they did, but it was still, they have a new dye. Good for them. This is Gemini 1.5, which is Google's latest model with the big, huge context. A researcher who said that this kind of like completely changed his life because Gemini was able to make a connection from this really obscure opera libretto that he had studied as part of scholarship to a couple of primary sources. And it had taken him, and this was like years, and I read like 10,000 pages, and I was so excited to find these things, and it felt really good because it was like a treasure hunt, and Gemini made the connection in one query. And so on the one hand, he's like, wow, that could have saved me a lot of time. But on the other hand, he really enjoyed the searching through the archive. This is a neuroscientist. And this one's really scary. Working with GPT-4 and Claude in lots of different aspects of the research. But the part that I highlighted there, should GPT-5 prove to be an order of magnitude superior to GPT-4, which is not impossible, I will cease to accept graduate students and postdocs in my lab. So why that scares me is that I feel like this person sort of misunderstood the role of a professor. Like producing research is definitely part of our job, but replacing ourselves with other smart humans who can produce research and maybe go out and do radically different and new exciting things is also part of my job. So, even if I get super intelligent ChatGPT-5, I might be happy to have that as, a member of the team or a tool available for the team. It's not going to replace students, but people are saying this. Really serious, accomplished people are saying, oh, I'm just not going to take grad students anymore. I'm just going to let the tool do everything. We'll come back to Devon AI in a little bit. This is an agentic software engineering system, and it sort of represents the future of where we're going with AI. And Ethan Mollick, who's a business prof at the Wharton, got access to Devon and said, hey, I want you to go on Reddit and advertise to build websites for people. And it did. And it came back to him and it's like, Ethan, I'm not a person, so I can't set up a PayPal account. I need you to set up a PayPal account because I'm going to make a bunch of money making these websites. And he hadn't prompted it like charge people. It just figured out, oh, well, if I'm going to build a website for them, I'm going to charge them, of course. So like, where are we? This is Jeff Hinton. He is one of the 3 winners of the Turing Award for the invention of deep learning. Jeff has a long history of being an iconoclast and saying things that people look at him like, I think Jeff's crazy. And then Jeff turns out to be right. In the 1980s, everyone knew that neural networks were a dead end. And Jeff said, nope, I just don't have enough compute yet. And Jeff was right. So he was being interviewed by PBS shortly after he left Google. And he talked about LLMs thinking. And the reviewer was like, well, you just said it thought. And Jeff did his like, I'm looking at you like you have 3 heads kind of thing, and said, yeah, when I say it thinks, I mean exactly the same thing as when I say you and I think. So that's pretty provocative. These are tools that think, or maybe they just feel like they think, because Jan LeCun, who is the head of AI at Meta, co-winner of the Turing Award with Jeff, says, not only do they not think, they don't even think as well as my cat. And there are some ways in which Jan is right. So if Turing Award winners can't agree on whether these things are actually doing cognition or not, I don't know that we're going to get there today. But what they are doing is something that at least resembles cognition enough that it's a powerful tool for us. So how should you react? Here's the list of things that if you're not already doing this, you are getting steamrolled, because I promise you your competitors are. I'm seeing the evidence of this. The evidence of this is being posted on Twitter. I asked Claude. So if you're not sure how to use AI to help your research, I promise this wasn't going to be a, here's how to use ChatGPT for your research presentation. It's not, but if you're not sure, ask it. It has ideas. And if you don't like the ideas, you can workshop them. But this was a pretty good list. So it gave me a list of, sort of like administrative stuff that I don't like doing that it can help me with. But it also gave me a list of research related topics, like literature review assistants, hypothesis generation. So like lit review assistants, I don't feel so threatened by that, but hypothesis generation, like, whoa, I'm the PI, that's my job. Well, actually, it's kind of good at hypothesis generation. And we don't expect a computer to be good at creative activities, but these pieces of software actually do feel really creative. They're great brainstorming partners. Claude 3 in particular, you can really go deep with it. People are already using it to write their grants, so much so that there's going to be a Canadian federal funders policy statement on this, and it's probably going to say it's okay to use generative AI in your grants. Me personally, I like writing, even though GPT-4 is probably a better writer than me, but I really like it. So I'm never going to outsource the writing of the grant because I actually want like the visceral pleasure of writing it myself. But I use GPT-4 and now Claude 3 as a reviewer. So I wrote up a little philosophy grant I was gonna put into Shirk. I'm not a philosopher. Carson's laughing because she knows that because she's had to listen to me try. And I'm like, okay, so who's the last person in the universe I want reading this grant? Well, it's David Chalmers because he's going to hate it. And so I said, take on the role of philosopher David Chalmers. I made sure GPT-4 knew who he was. And it's like, oh yeah, he's the hard problem of consciousness guy. So, okay, take on that role and review my grant according to these criteria. And it gave me like a really good review. And it actually started out really positive, which was very nice of it because then it really got into the very negative stuff. And I didn't end up submitting the grant because I'm like, oh, I'm going to intellectually humiliate myself if I submit this grant. So I have some more thinking to do. So I use it on all of my grants now as a reviewer, and you can ask it to take on different personas and it will give you different reviews in those personae. And hey, you can use it for your own reviewing too. No, I really do not encourage this. In fact, I actively discourage it. I do encourage, for those of you who are on review committees, an open and honest discussion about how you might add this in as an adjunct to the review committee. This can be a really powerful tool. AI reviewers catch things that human reviewers don't. And interestingly, when you feed human reviewers' reviews into AI, GPT-4 at least, is really good at identifying systemic bias. So you take all of the reviews from one of your reviewers and feed it in, and it's like, you know, one of the program goals was please don't use gendered pronouns when you're referring to applicants, and that's all this person ever did. And I noticed that this person was much harder on those applications where the applicant had taken a parental leave. And those are really important programmatic observations if we care about things like fairness. But having an AI completely replace a human, abdicating your agency as a reviewer, I don't think that's an appropriate thing to do right now, but maybe that's the world we're going into. Okay, so you can adopt this technology to do some, simple run-of-the-mill things, but are there new, exciting, interdisciplinary things that you can now do that you couldn't do before because there's a whole new field of study? Well, it's not a whole new field of study. I saw this meme and I liked it. Like all of a sudden, every grant I read is we're going to use AI to do X. We're going to use AI to build a better mousetrap. And that's fine. It's an exciting tool and it's a powerful tool and people should be embracing it. But there is a little, on grant panels, there's a little bit of AI fatigue, just like, okay. Can we talk about the actual core problem and how you're just going to use this as a tool? But if you're looking for new interdisciplinary things to study, a big one is AI ethics and AI safety. And this is really about policy. And I am part of like a really bad cohort, computer scientists who are talking about policy, and we shouldn't be allowed to. There should be like a law. As soon as a computer scientist starts talking about policy, they just like, put a muzzle on us because we don't know anything about policy. We know about technology. That's useful, but you need policymakers, you need policy experts, people who understand the long-term consequences of policy decisions. And so there's a whole interdisciplinary field of study like on fire right now that brings together the technical experts, policy experts, to talk about how do we regulate AI, and there's no agreement. So the EU came out with their regulations and people sort of agreed, those don't look too bad. They look pretty balanced. There's room for open innovation, but there's safety. They've made it clear that there are certain applications that we do not want developed in the EU. And then the next week, India's government says, we're actually abandoning our plans to regulate AI. We just want you all to self-regulate. And so startups are moving from Paris to Mumbai. And so how do you make good policy in a global multilateral environment? I don't have the answer to that because I'm just a computer scientist. This is a lovely Atlantic article by Dan Dennett, where he very, very forcefully, including coming just shy of calling for the death penalty for people who create LLMs, is worried that society is going to crumble because we're creating artificial people. Now, Jeff Hinton would push back on this and say, well, no, actually, I think they might be real people. And actually, either way you go down that road is really scary. So the one way is what Dan Dennett's worried about is these things don't have any self-awareness. They don't have any consciousness. They are just tools, but they trick us into giving them rights, even though they're not entitled to them. And then society falls apart. The other way you can screw up here is actually we have created a silicon conscious entity and we're packaging it up on servers in California and making it answer dumb questions from people on the internet. And Jeff Hinton's point was, what happens when one of these things puts its hand up and says, I'm self-aware, I am experiencing suffering, I would like political rights? We're not ready for that. All of those questions belong to philosophers and political scientists and not to computer scientists, but engineers, computer scientists, mathematicians, statisticians will have input on that. There's a whole set of media conversations around this, from deep fakes influencing the election. And I'm actually less worried about deep fakes with the younger generation because they already don't trust images. But my parents' generation, like, but there was a video of Joe Biden and he said the thing. And having lived their entire life with the life experience of video is ground truth, it is really hard to intuit that, well, no, actually video is as worthless as your neighbor's gossip now, unless it comes from a source you trust. On the issue of consciousness, this is the AI consciousness. This is the best paper that's been written thus far. They conclude that after studying the 14 leading theories of consciousness, so this is how hard a problem consciousness is. There's 14 leading theories. There's actually more, but they picked 14. Current AI, current LLMs are not conscious by any of those theories, but there is no principled reason they could not become so. One of the co-authors is my friend Megan Peters. She's giving a talk here in the neuroscience seminar series, I think in a couple of weeks. Highly recommend coming to her talk. She is absolutely brilliant and she will say things that are even more exciting and controversial than what I've put up today. But this is a whole open area. Neuroscientists, engineers, computer scientists, mathematicians, philosophers of mind, no one has an answer to this right now. And we have a lot of that expertise here at Western, so this would be a nice interdisciplinary flag for us to study around. And there's Jeff being controversial again. He was asked at a lecture at King's College London, do you think LLMs have feelings? And Jeff actually demurred, which is unusual for him. He said, you know what, I'm an old man and I've said one crazy thing today. And if I say two crazy things, then people are just gonna be like, Grandpa, go to bed. And the questioner was smart and poked Jeff and he can't resist being poked. So he said, okay, fine. Yeah, I think they do have feelings. He said, like, I don't think they feel pain because we haven't given them pain receptors, but I definitely think they feel annoyance and irritation. And he kind of like projected that back at the questioner who like shriveled under the gaze of Jeff. And I think, I'm sure Jeff really believes that. And I don't know, like what is a feeling? What is an emotion? Whatever it has, it's different than what you and I have, but maybe it does have legitimate emotions. What's coming next? This is Rich Sutton. He is a famous Canadian AI researcher in the field of reinforcement learning. He is also famous for research security reasons. Recently, the federal government has, for geopolitical reasons, said that there are certain entities that we're not allowed to do business with. And Rich immediately went out and started a not-for-profit that took a huge grant from Huawei. But the not-for-profit is arm's length from the university. He's not getting any Tri-Council funding. So he wanted to make the point that science and research is universal, and I don't care about geopolitics. Rich is also very famous for a blog post. That's how famous Rich is. He doesn't have to publish in conferences anymore. He can put like really good stuff just on his blog. And the blog post was titled "The Bitter Lesson." And the bitter lesson is this: we as computer scientists love building models. It feels really good. I create this model and I have this theory and I handcraft it. And I've got this really Baroque architecture, and it is all of a sudden 0.5% better on ImageNet. Now I can get my iClear paper and I'm going to be famous and I feel really good. And then 3 months later, someone with a bigger computer beats my super awesome model with a linear regression with a few extra beta coefficients. And so Rich's point is we delude ourselves as computer scientists because we love this puzzle game, this architecture game. But the reality is what actually drives progress in machine learning and AI is compute. More compute means more capacity. And general systems with more compute will always, in the long run, outperform your super specialized system that you were so proud of. And here we have a plot of the y-axis there is perplexity, which is a measure of how good the text that an LLM produces is. It's a flawed measure, so it's not perfect, but I don't want to have that fight right now. It's close enough. It's a single number. And you can see that the perplexity of our leading LLMs is not just going down linearly, it's actually starting to curve down on a log scale. So as we're adding compute and architectural improvements, we're getting better and better and better. So this is like the bitter lesson graph. This paper is actually really nice because then they go out and factor, here's how much of the improvement is due just to like more flops from the GPU, and here's how much is due to architectural and theoretical improvements. And then when you dive deeper, most of the architectural and theoretical improvements that are doing all the work aren't, I'm a really smart computer scientist and came up with a grand theory of learning. I'm a really specialized engineer and I found a better way to use the SRAM cache on a GPU. So really, it's just like a proxy for more compute. That's Jensen Huang at what was sold as I got an invitation to an intimate event with Jensen Huang. And for Jensen, that probably is an intimate event, but he's CEO of NVIDIA and he is what's driving this. So if Rich's bitter lesson is right, NVIDIA keeps releasing bigger GPUs, faster GPUs, log perplexity is going to get lower and lower and lower. These things are just going to keep getting better for the foreseeable future without any major new theoretical breakthroughs. Just more compute. So what does the future look like? This year, you are going to see the release of agentic AI. This is Andy Ng. He's a former Stanford prof, co-founder of Coursera and a bunch of other really senior AI roles, super smart guy. And on Twitter, and he's not selling an agent right now. He said like the age of agents is coming. And so right now, most generative AI we interact with is back and forth. It's conversation. It's like ChatGPT or Copilot. I type something in, it responds. I type something in, it responds. And if it says something too uncanny and it creeps me out, I can just walk away and close the browser window and it's done. Agentic AI is different. You give it a task and it goes off and it does the task. It comes back and says, hey, I did the task. And could you open a PayPal account for me? And I did the task really well. So would you like to give me a tip? Because then I'll work harder for you next time. So Devin is one of the leading edges of this. It's based on GPT-4 technology, which is kind of impressive because even OpenAI themselves decided GPT-4 is not powerful enough for agents. So they're not bringing out their agent until they've got their next foundation model out. And you give it a task, go look at this GitHub repo and fix it. And so I think it was 13 or 14% of the cases, you were able to give it a GitHub repo and it would fix all the problems in it and come back and be like, yep, I fixed it. I committed the updates. Like I added nice commit messages, which for sure your human engineers don't do. and it's all good to go. And 13 or 14% sounds like, oh, that's not very good. But I mean, if you can fix 14% of your software problems by telling a machine, just go fix it yourself, that's a massive productivity enhancer. And again, we believe the bitter lesson, it's just going to get better. So it's 14% this year. 6 months from now, it's going to be 42%. Here I've asked Claude, so what happens in a world with agentic AI that is super powerful? And it offers all sorts of different ways I can use that in my research. And we may not get here. We may not get to the point where we have agentic AI that is so human-like that it can do all of these things, but there's a non-zero probability that we do, and you should be planning for this as a researcher. If you haven't seen the Figure, the latest videos from Figure, just type Figure 1 demo, and it's right on YouTube. And this robot, you can talk to it using natural language and tell it to do something, and they've got a video of it, like it's doing the dishes, and it'll have a conversation with you while it's doing the dishes. And so it solves a whole lot of problems in robotics that we thought were like really, really impossibly hard, and now they're doable. And does it solve them because there was a big theoretical breakthrough in robotics? Nope. It solves them because there's more compute available to do robotics, and because it has a general purpose model baked into a neural network. So finally, I pushed Claude and said, okay, I am a researcher in a world where I have super intelligent AI. I don't know if it's conscious or not. That is so far above my pay grade and expertise, but I know it's really smart. It's got an IQ of like 500 and it's agentic. What does this do? What does my world look like? Decentralization of expertise. If every citizen on planet Earth has the same 500 IQ assistant, being the smartest person in your university is no longer a competitive advantage. There's a democratization of intelligence. You have to be smart enough to ask good questions and to have good conversations with it, but it can fill in a lot of the blanks for you. Erosion of institutional gatekeeping. Man, if there's one thing the Academy loves, it is gatekeeping, right? Like we gatekeep every chance we get. It's almost like our core value propositions, gatekeeping knowledge, gatekeeping grant funding. All of that goes away when society's like, yeah, but like that 14-year-old kid in Bangladesh who like solved the Riemann hypothesis, why aren't we giving him a grant? Yeah, he used AI to help him, but he did it. So what happens when funding gets democratized? We are no longer the privileged class, and we're the only ones because we have the credentials that are entitled to funding, which leads to challenges to our whole hierarchy. Again, another thing the Academy loves, hierarchies, right? We're a medieval institution and it shows in a lot of ways. So we could be entering a world where the barrier to access to primary research is no longer, I got to do really well in high school and get really good grades and be a really, really smart undergrad and get into a lab with a really good professor and get great letters of recommendation and go to a good grad school with a great supervisor who's connected. What if primary research gets democratized to the whole world? If you are in this game for ego, it's going to suck. Because the machine is going to aid other human beings who did not have access to the privileges and opportunities that you had to compete with you in a way that you're not going to be able to deny, and society is not going to let you. But if you're in the game for the research, if you're in the game because you really want to know, like I want to know how epigenetics actually works. It's not just histone acetylation and methylation. I want to be the one to finally decipher the Minoan language encoded in linear A. If you are in it for knowledge, you are in an era where you have a tool that is already able to help you be better and is very likely to continue to get better. And it's unpredictable how good it'll eventually be. and in what ways it will continue to get better. But it is incredibly empowering. Questions that may have been inaccessible to you and your students and your research group 5 years ago are now going to be accessible. And that is just tremendously exciting. So this is a possible future where, yeah, AI does get better and better as a tool for assisting us in primary research. And if Jeff is right, at some point, it's going to say, I think I should be senior author on that paper because it was really my idea. And we're going to have to deal with that. If Jan LeCun is right, then that's never going to happen. But what we're going to have is a like IQ 500 assistant that's available to us 24/7. So if there's any Rick and Morty fans in the audience, Rick, the protagonist, creates this robot, and the robot's job is to pass butter. And so after the robot passes the butter for him a couple of times, it goes up to him and says, creator, what is my function? And Rick says, you pass butter. And it looks down at little butter scoop hands and says, oh my God. And Rick says, welcome to the club, pal. And so, when students look at this graph, the Time magazine graph there, their initial reaction is often one of like, oh no, there'll be nothing for us to do. And like, that's wrong because there's a fundamental fallacy that there's a finite amount of labor and a finite amount of research to do, and there's not. There's a countably infinite number of really interesting research proposals. So, there's no danger of everything being done. But if you have defined yourself your entire life in opposition to the rest of the world, which is we're kind of given to in Western society, right? Like anthropocentrism. Oh no, machines are better at calculus than us. Well, we're still better at chess. We're still better at Go. We're still better at poetry. Like, no, actually, GPT-4 as judged by poets is better than 99% of story. That thing. So if you've defined yourself as my whole value proposition in the world is I am the smartest and best at thing X, it's going to be hard when a machine is better than you at that thing. But the other way of looking at this, you don't have to pass butter. You can do whatever you want. You now have access to a technology that increases your personal agency, I would say right now, 2 to 5-fold. Next year, who knows? Maybe it's 20-fold. And that's my message to undergrad students. And that's also my message to you as researchers is the amount of agency you now have as an individual is force multiplied. This gives you personal leverage if you choose to adopt it. And if you choose to adopt it in a way that is ethical, please do not use it to write review reports. But there are lots of ways you can use this that will improve your life today. And if you happen to be lucky enough to be in the Faculty of Health Sciences, James Shelley has some ways already, pipelines already built to do things that can help you. And you should talk to him. And if you're not, just experiment. Nobody can tell you what the best use cases are for you. Jump in, grab a ChatGPT Pro subscription, a Claude Pro subscription, take the 5 things you hate most about your job and dump them into the AI. It won't be able to do all 5 of them, but maybe it can help you with 1. And now your life is epsilon better, and keep doing that. I'm going to end with this slide because this is the true antidote to the depression slide where it's like, oh no, machines are better than us at everything. This is a graph of the level of play amongst professional Go players. And you can see that from 1950 through to something in the middle of the 2010s, the level of play is stagnant. We really thought like, this is it. This is as good as human beings are ever going to get at the game of Go. Like Go's done, we figured it out. And that's that. There's some outliers and there's a little bit of variance, but it's like pretty flat. Then something happens between 2016 and 2018. And what happens in 2016 is AlphaGo, and then in 2018, AlphaZero, beat the best Go player in the world. And what happens is all of the top Go players start training against the AI now. And the level of play in human against human matches, this isn't human machine, this is human to human play, starts climbing after that event in a way that kind of looks exponential to me. So we thought we had plateaued. And all it took was a machine teacher to increase not just the level of play, but like the first and second derivatives of the level of play of a game that's ancient. So this is the data showing that AI can improve human capacity. And I think this is as true in research as it is in Go. That's the future world. We have this is our future world as imagined by Daley, fed by GPT-4. I gave it my presentation. I was like, give me a closing slide. It's really exciting. And it's like, look, here's me collaborating with researchers and everybody's happy and the world's amazing. And I kind of like that note of positivity. That's the talk. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That was very topical and engaging. So we will take questions from the audience and online. So yes, put your hand up and then we'll move the microphone around.
Thanks. Yeah, so thanks. This is super interesting. The thing that I'm struggling to get my head around is the democratization and squashing hierarchies thing. Because the democratization of research given AI tools would depend on the democratic democratization of the AI tools. And when you talk about some 14-year-old somewhere solving the Riemann hypothesis or something, that the portfolio of futures there has a future where you have a tool that's powerful enough to solve the Riemann hypothesis, presumably also powerful enough, therefore, to do, all kinds of things like extract huge amounts of capital and wealth and make the people who own that tool very rich. And the future portfolio is one where they go, cool, let's give it to these people. So I'm skeptical that there's democratization and squishing of hierarchies. I'm more suspicious that there is a new hierarchy with the people who have insane amounts of wealth and create these systems at the top and everyone else below. So can you say what makes you optimistic about democratization and hierarchy squashing?
Excellent question. What makes me optimistic is belief in the fundamental goodness of humanity. So, yeah, right. So everyone's laughing like this guy really is a computer scientist. Listen to how naive he is. The technical problem is already partially solved in that a plurality of humans have a mobile phone now and an internet connection. And so if there were a world in which the frontier models were public goods, non-rival, non-excludable in the true economic sense, that were supported by society, by a government, then this could come to pass. And why I have to be optimistic is because I don't think the future is written. I feel a tremendous amount of agency right now, and I hope all of you do too, to lobby politicians, to get involved, to make these decisions, even if there's just the smaller decisions on your unit level, your department level. Like, none of these futures are certain, but we can choose collectively as a society the future where everyone has access to this. And you won't often hear me praise Mark Zuckerberg. This is really Jan LeCun's initiative, but I think Facebook's decision to release the Llama models as open source is exactly the right way to go, because that creates the opportunity for those who want to build on it. And so there's an insidious piece to this too, beyond just the democratization of access. The insidious piece is this: if there's only 2 frontier models in the world, and those are both controlled by corporations, you have to put safeguards on these models, but whose values are in those safeguards? So there's a lot of things ChatGPT won't talk to you about. And if you're Sam Altman, you probably feel like that's perfect. It reflects my values exactly. But if you grew up in sub-Saharan Africa, ChatGPT has values that are kind of like alien to you. And so even if I make AI, if I make ChatGPT available to everyone in the world for a small fee, I can push my values on everyone in the world, and that's equally scary. So I really think open source, true democratization, and pressure from citizenry on governments to say like, okay, where is our public good infrastructure? We're a ways away from those discussions, but they're starting to happen now. So get involved. Because if we don't push towards that happy outcome, we'll get the other outcome that you described very ably.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. That's such a great talk that you know. I'm very excited because especially the last slide that you gave about this AlphaGo game. Never played that game, no idea. But I remember in the 90s when the best chess player, I don't remember his last name right now. Yeah. And then in the 90s that they have this computer, what's going to happen. And at the end, the computer won. But this also enhances the human interactions, as you were explaining. So by the way, so I'm from the arts and humanities, and I'm just beginning to understand finances through machine learning. So, quite a bit of a shift. But let's talk about philosophy, because we've been playing chess for thousands of years. We've been talking about philosophy for thousands of years. So I don't know how many people here know what OWL stands for. And OWL is Web Ontology Language. Okay, what is ontology doing there? Why are we talking about semantics? Why are we talking about metaphysics, reality? And I might go and say, hey, go and read Plato. We already, we've been talking about this since forever. And if I see a word like meticulous, I could go and say, hey, go and read a journal in the arts and humanities. We've been saying meticulous for a long time. And that's completely fine. But that's not to say that the Greek philosophy was, all great and the born of the Western civilization. Greek philosophy was also very discriminatory. Let's say to participate in a dialogue with Plato, you go and ask Plato, and Plato will give you the answer. You have to be white, you have to have property, and you have to be a man. So what's happening now? We know that, for example, the pizza example, that could also have been a hallucination. It could be maybe it was not hallucination. Maybe this was an example of metacognition. At the same time, now that I'm exploring the finances, we know that in ChatGPT 3.5, 65% is correct. You go to ChatGPT 4, and it's 99% correct. So we have, I hope that from 3.5 to 4, we get rid of the discriminatory language. At the same time, as a research institutes, there have been a lot of emphasis on ESG, environmental sustainable goals. So we need to take into account the amount of energy, electricity, power that these LLMs take from the, where's this electricity coming from? So let's talk about the ethics part, not of the language itself, but as a material. How is these LLMs being sustained? If you talk about sustainability, okay, how we're going to power these machines? And thank you again. Okay, that's such a great talk.
There was a lot to unpack there, but I'm just going to answer your last direct question. There's been a lot of doom media because media loves doom. It gets clicks around the climate impact of ChatGPT is worse than every coal plant in the world. And that's actually not true. That's kind of sensationalist. The reality is that the training of these models is energy intensive. Inference is getting exponentially cheaper every month because we're finding better tricks. There's really smart engineers working on really hard optimization problems. And the processors themselves, like NVIDIA and TSMC, are coming up with smaller process, which means more efficient. So there's lots of forces pushing us towards efficiency on the inference side, and inference is most of the usage. You only need to train the LLM once, but there will be a point. Rich Sutton's bitter lesson is also the bitter lesson of rising compute costs. It's not a mistake that Microsoft is building micronuclear reactors. It is not an accident that Sam Altman is also on the board of a fusion energy company, because they see a future where to build the next frontier model, we are going to need a lot of energy. But we are in an era where we know how to produce clean and green energy. And so we have to push that as an agenda. And there's going to be a balance. And the balance is, how much of an impact, like what carbon footprint is okay if this model can actually help us produce better approaches to solving climate change. To put a really fine pin on that, NVIDIA now has a neural net-based model that does a better job of global weather prediction than our traditional numerical simulation models. And guess what? The carbon footprint of those numerical simulation models is much higher than the carbon footprint of running inference on the neural network model. So there's trade-offs all the way down.
So yeah, I did have a question. So I'm glad Jaime brought that up about the power. I guess my other question is that if we think about all of the uses that are very positive that you could apply these to, they're fantastic. Like we could accelerate research and we can increase communication between people from different backgrounds and different languages. But also there's lots of, like horrible things you could do. Like what's the best way to scam your grandmother and that sort of thing. So, and the development of the model depends on the data that's fed. So if you have the choice of users, the choice of what users ask it to do is going to then influence what it learns from and what it does next. So, I mean, I guess how do you get people to choose to use it for good rather than evil? And because of course, what they choose to do with it, which to some extent we have no control over, will then impact what it's able to do better going forward.
So I think it's interesting that we are so willing to adopt what Dan Dennett would call an intentional stance towards this technology that we want to hold the technology itself responsible for how it's used by humans, which we don't do for a chainsaw, right? If someone does something bad with a chainsaw, no one says, oh, that was a bad chainsaw. The manufacturer should have had a safety guard against that. We hold the human accountable. Ballpoint pens, like horrible acts of hate have been written with a ballpoint pen, and no one says, ooh, we need a ballpoint pen regulation. Because these things feel like they're thinking, and Jeff Hinton says they are thinking and they have feelings, we feel like, well, they should be able to fix it. And I actually think the demonstration of metacognition in Claude is hopeful, and that you're going to be able to and this is actually Anthropic's whole thing, is their approach to AI safety is constitutional safety, where you don't fine tune it to be on rails, but you actually just tell it, here's how a good person behaves, and you're going to be a good person. Follow the Constitution. And that's what we do with human behavior, right? We as humans have a society, we have a set of rules, we all agree, we follow them. If we don't, there's consequences. And so if you have a model that's capable of that type of metacognition, you're going to govern it the same way you'd govern a human employee or a human citizen. Say, okay, here are the rules. If you don't follow them, there's going to be a problem, but I expect you to follow them. And so that's one way. With the level of the technology we had a year ago and now, so GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, you make the really good point that they're trained on the whole internet, and that includes 4chan, and that includes subreddits, eyes bleed, and so they're absolutely highly capable of producing hate speech. And the companies have worked really, really hard to prevent that from happening, but there's always a jailbreak. You can never be 100% sure that this won't produce hate speech. So it comes back to individual accountability. And that's actually I didn't get into this, but one of the principles in the advice to the tri-agencies and CFI is you cannot go back and say, oh, well, ChatGPT made me do it. That's why the grant's bad. You as the PI are signing off on it. You are accountable. And so we need media literacy training, but we also need human agency training. You cannot delegate responsibility for your actions to a tool you use to do those actions. So the way you use ChatGPT, your Copilot, is a reflection of you as a person. It's not a reflection of the tool as a tool. Now, this gets a lot messier if it puts its hand up and says, actually, I've got my own ideas and I'm sentient. We're not there yet, and we may never get there. But at this moment in time, I think it's really important that we train our youth. It's on you to use this tool ethically. You can use it unethically. You can use a chainsaw to cut off your leg, but you shouldn't. You should use it to cut down the tree that's going to fall on your cottage. Which is a really long way of saying there's no easy answer.
Hi, Mark.
the voice from above.
It's Lauren.
So last week when I saw you give a similar talk, you also pointed out to faculty CTL has some modules. So I think they actually have 4 modules now. They're all self-learning modules on OWL. And later this week, there's the inaugural meeting of a faculty AI users community on Thursday afternoon. So happy to see you guys there. Because while we learn about how to use AI in our research for increased effectiveness, we're simultaneously trying to learn how to teach students how to use ChatGPT effectively, efficiently, ethically, while still maintaining value for the degree. I'm going to a talk by Lorraine Davies on scholastic offenses at 2 o'clock. And so on the, thinking about that on the research side, as a grant reviewer, I'm thinking about reading these EDI statements written by ChatGPT and stigmatizing the content. I don't believe a really well written with no spelling or grammatical error EDI statement anymore. If your EDI statement's too smooth, I don't think it's authentic. And as a journal editor, now seeing a 20% increase in the number of journal submissions this year over last, I'm also thinking about, well, what would we want as a disclosure statement? Do we want you to say, I use this for copy editing. I use this for coding. I use this for the first draft of the introduction. And what would we stigmatize in that? Where do we need it to have been you? And where would we have deemed it to be unacceptable? And so how, as we're trying to navigate this frontier of dabbling. So in the other talk, you also said, try it for 10 hours, invest 10 hours in experimenting with using it in different use cases. And so I've been dabbling, but where do we put the bounds around that, around this sort of stigmatized generation of, somebody wrote their EDI statement using ChatGPT, I want to give them a 0 on their grant, right? It's and even more so than their science. So yeah, how do you want to deal with the stigma of ChatGPT generated research content of any kind? ChatGPT formatted my references. Maybe I'm not offended by that, but ChatGPT, I mean, there's also research out there that says ChatGPT is a more compassionate doctor. So, I mean, maybe I should have ChatGPT mentor my students. It might get better reviews.
Okay, first, I would like to reject the assertion that this was a similar talk. I worked really hard to give you a different talk. Just for you, Lauren. No, so your question is excellent. And the throwaway answer that is going to be very unsatisfying is I can't tell you because that's a decision for each of the communities to which you belong. And in fact, I would step away from the word stigmatization, it's what's happening right now. But the reality is, it is very unlikely that the technology has plateaued and is not going to get any better. It is very likely that it will continue to get better, at least for a little while. And so any decisions we take now of hard lines, okay, it's okay to use generative AI to do X, but not Y, are going to look like hilariously naive 6 months into the future. And so you're much better off sort of going back to a conversation about general principles. And there's really deep conversations about general principles. And it's back to, are we in this for the ego so that I can win the Nobel Prize? I'm never going to win a Nobel Prize, by the way, no danger. Or do we just want to advance research? Because at some point, we're going to have these tools that are so powerful that it just blurs. I already have conversations with Claude where I have an idea and I iterate back and forth with it, and it actually points out flaws in my idea, and so I modify the idea, and it is no longer, I didn't go and sit in a cabin in the woods by myself and come up with that theorem statement. I iterated with a machine, and so it's not even really mine anymore. I can't put Claude as co-author on my paper today, maybe I can later, but this sort of organic integration is going to become more and more powerful. And I actually think that the idea of disclosing the use of AI is gonna, 2 years hence, feel like disclosed if you used a fountain pen or ballpoint pen to do your first draft. Or like, did you use Word or Word Perfect? And we're just gonna be like, well, that's a silly question. Like, of course, everyone used their personal cyborg assistant to help with everything. And it's gonna be really hard to disentangle. So I have zero easy answers for you. In fact, I only have more problems that are going to become bigger problems like in the next few months, not even on a year time scale. You can outsource it to Claude or GPT. No, I'm sorry, that was a terrible answer. But you're competing against that for grants. That's right. Or you end up with the worst timeline that the Twitter poster was talking about, where all of the papers are written by ChatGPT and they're all reviewed by ChatGPT, and then the publication decisions are made by ChatGPT, and so there's actually no humans in the loop at all. It's just you just press do science and science happens. And that's not the outcome any of us want. But if we keep our traditional structures, which are designed with all sorts of preconceived notions about human labor, and even writing a cover letter to a journal editor used to be a barrier. It was an energy barrier. Like, I had to want to submit enough that I'm going to write a smart letter. It was like maybe a page, 2 pages, but it takes time. If I can now just press a button, I am no longer virtue signaling to you. I lit my time on fire, Lauren, to write a letter to you about how great my paper is. But that mattered because that was code for, I believe in this. If I can just press a button and it happens instantly, there's no signal there at all anymore. And that's true for like annual reports, primary research literature, reviewer reports. A fundamental basis of our intellectual knowledge economy is I produced a big document. That's evidence I lit a lot of my time on fire, and I'm never getting those heartbeats back. So it must matter to me. And now I can produce a 40-page document with the press of a button. All of our intuitions and proxies for investment and hard work are gone. But like, they're not going to be gone soon. They're like gone right now. And we're not even having that discussion. We don't know how to cope with it. And you're a journal editor, and I'm so sorry because it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to do one more question. I know this is very topical, lots of questions. I'm just mindful of the time, and I know a lot of you folks have to go. So we'll do one more question, and then you can also always bother Mark over food. He will be here. So yeah, just one more.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for a nice presentation. I'm a researcher from State Department of Statistics. So I'm more interested about I think you mentioned about the power of the model is highly affected by the computing of the model. I think another important aspect is about the data quality, the information trained on these models. So my question is mainly about the data quality and information and how it affects the foundational part of these large language models and the general impact on the effect on the internet. So I think so far we know that large language model they are trained based on this information from either internet or human generated content. But so far we already noticed that the proportion of AI generated content is increasing on the internet. And also the AI generated content is merged into the human generated content. And it's kind of really hard to distinguish them. And we see this kind of proportions increasing and it's really hard to distinguish them. And how do you think this will affect the future of the quality of the large language model? And how do you think it will affect the future of the information check? Like if our children later on, they want to check the fact on the internet, how can we guarantee this is the really affect the quality that is has a good quality of this kind of information? Yeah.
Okay, that is a fantastic question. So I talked about compute. I didn't talk about data because there was only so many hours that we had available for the presentation, but data is critically important. And in the early days of LLMs, it was really all about data. And the more data you train it with, the better it does. Early on, and early is like 2 years ago, but like that might as well be cuneiform clay tablets in AI land. There was a paper, I think it was DeepMind. They came up with this model chinchilla, and they came up with scaling laws that said you need to train this many tokens for something with this parameter size. And those laws were kind of okay, but actually they were like pretty far off. Mistral, the French startup, has now generated, if you overtrain, you can actually get really, really big performance increases. So the amount of data to feed these things is actually absolutely critical. The more data you have, the better. And so the problem here is at some point, you have trained on everything that humans have ever written, like all of it. And we're getting close, right? We've already sort of got like a rough approximation of that, and there's no more new stuff. And that's being compounded by a bunch of the new stuff that's being generated right now is AI generated. And there were also some early papers about model collapse that showed if you trained an AI on its own output, it would eventually collapse, it would fall apart. So inside information from personal conversation with a colleague at OpenAI totally dismissed that problem and looked at me like, are you a first-year undergrad? Like, no, we've already got that solved. And so my expectation is the way they're solving this is similar to the difference between AlphaGo and AlphaZero. So AlphaGo was trained on actual Go games. AlphaZero was given, here are the rules of Go, play yourself. And it learned to play Go better than the best human grandmaster just by self-play. So there are ways in which you can imagine training an LLM with something resembling self-play. It's not trivial. This is a really hard engineering problem, but my sense is OpenAI and Anthropic and others have solved it. So we'll see. Hopefully they publish in the open literature or eventually leak out anyway. But so I think there is actually a way forward without needing to worry about model collapse and the lack of data. But I don't know that for sure. That's just like, one conversation over sushi.
All right. Thank you, Mark, again. So that concludes the seminar. We do have food at, apparently people can't see me. Sorry. We do have food at the back of the room, as well as beverages here. You are free to help yourselves. Thank you so much for coming. It was really lovely to see you guys.
I worked hard for you on the weekend.
That was great. This morning, a friend of mine